To me, we live in a world where a lot of the tech that's available to us is in the realms of incremental upgrades, which means it takes a long time to see any meaningful improvement in the tech we use. You know, a couple of megabits here, a couple of kilobytes there. And nowhere, as a photographer, is this more obvious to me than in cameras. Now, as an example of this, let's take a look at the Micro Four Thirds user. So let's take a look at the Olympus OMD cameras from the start. So you got the EM10, the EM5, and the EM1, so entry-level, mid-range, and professional bodies respectively, and they all had 16 megapixel sensors. Now, as far as I'm aware, the 10 and the 5 had the same sensor. The EM1s might have been a little bit different, but the thing that's actually capturing the images is essentially the same thing in these three cameras. Now, this carried over to the EM10 Mark II and the EM5 Mark II, so now you've got 5 cameras, all with very similar, if not the same, 16 megapixel sensors. So the bit that's actually capturing the image is the same in all 5 cameras. All right, so what about processing? What about how the image is delivered to you? Well, the EM5 had the TruePic 6 processor, and then the EM10, the EM1, the EM10 Mark II, and the EM5 Mark II all had the TruePic 7 processor. So once again, we have these 5 cameras, all essentially capable of giving you the exact same image. So then what's the point in having 5 cameras that can essentially do the same thing from a photography point of view? Well, this is where the marketing and the incremental upgrades comes in, and where things start to get quite murky if you don't actually look at the details. Like, realistically, if you're only taking pictures and you don't care about weather sealing, why would you choose an EM1 over an EM10? And Olympus aren't the only company to do this. All you have to do is look at the sheer number of Canon Rebel cameras to see that they're definitely not the only ones doing this. And of course, the marketing focuses on the numbers, emphasizing that more numbers, bigger this and more of that is better, because, you know, more and bigger is better, right? No, not really. More dynamic range, more megapixels, higher ISO capabilities, thousands of autofocus points. These are the numbers that the marketing drives into your brains, making you believe that you're getting a better product, when in actual fact, for the average user, most of it is utterly meaningless. So to put my money where my mouth is, I went out a couple of days ago with this old beast, the Canon 5D Classic, and this really quite crap 28-70 f2.8 from Sigma to get a few shots and to hopefully show you that good images don't necessarily mean you have to have a camera with good specs. Whoops. Now, as always, all of these images are shot raw. I always shoot raw if the camera is capable, simply because it gives you the absolute most out of the sensors. Now, if you shoot JPEG, that is entirely up to you, but just be aware that you are at a deficit when it comes to things like dynamic range. I always found the RAW versus JPEG debate to be kind of stupid. If you're intending to share immediately with your friends and so on, just shoot JPEG, get it over with. If you're going to put in the time and you want the absolute most out of your sensor, shoot RAW. It's really that simple. I'm just looking at the way the light's picking up here, look. I like that one-way sign. So, does the 5D have autofocus? Yes, it does. It has 9 autofocus points, only one of which is even remotely accurate. So, what about ISO? It has a range of 100 to 1600, expandable from 50 to 3200. But this is where this old beast and modern cameras kind of differ, because this might seem to have a relatively small range on the ISO, but it is usable throughout that range, as opposed to some of your more modern cameras, which can go up to like 500,000 ISO and are not really usable anywhere near that. Now, I can elaborate a little bit on this one, having owned the Sony A7S. Now, this is a very impressive camera. Even the very first one, the original one, it is a great camera, and it's so good I'm going to buy another one because, you know, low megapixel count on a bigger sensor just has a look, and I really enjoyed the photos that I got from that when I had it. But it has an upper ISO limit of about 500,000 or thereabouts, but it's only really usable, you know, if you're being completely honest with yourself, to get a good image up to about 40,000 with noise reduction in post. So that's like, what, 3.5 stops below that upper limit, which renders all of that extra utterly useless. So let's talk about sensor size, and since this is a full frame camera, let's talk about all of that sweet, sweet dynamic range I'm getting, right? No. If you believe the numbers from DxOMark, it's got about 11 stops, but that's 11 stops in lab tests. So in the real world, in most real circumstances, you're probably actually getting about 9 or 10 stops, which puts this full frame sensor behind my EM1 Mark II and Lumix GH5, which both have Micro Four Thirds sensors. You know, those little tiny useless sensors. So where am I going with all this nonsense? What am I talking about? What is the point of this? Well, on paper, this camera is utter garbage by today's standards. You know, specs-wise, this is utter crap by today's standards, but it can still produce absolutely beautiful looking images. And this is the whole point. The numbers for most people, and depending on your use, are meaningless. I mean, sure, your sports photographers are going to want high burst rates and good ISO performance and stuff like that, and your landscape photographers are going to want all of the dynamic range, but for most users, this thing is going to produce all of the images you need, and it's got none of the specs. You know, I'm not saying that modern cameras are bad, they're obviously not. I mean, all of my professional cameras are modern-ish cameras, but the marketing makes it seem like anything from more than 5 years ago is a relic, when in actual fact, cameras from more than 10 years ago can even match or outperform modern cameras. I mean, one example I can think of straight off the top of my head is the Nikon D800, which I owned. The image quality from that thing is absolutely gorgeous, you know, and it's full frame, 36 megapixels, 14 plus stops of dynamic range. It is a beautiful camera, and you can pick one up now for like £400. Now, of course, you professional shooters, we know what we want, we know what we need our cameras to do, and we buy accordingly. But for people just getting into the photography game, for you people who are really interested in photography, want to take a step up from a phone and get a camera, ask yourself a few little questions first before you just buy whatever is brand new on the shelves or that guy in that electronics shop says is the best camera you can buy. Now, the first question you should ask yourself, to me, is like, where is your current camera, whatever it is you're using, where is it letting you down? And if you can't answer this, honestly, if you can't actually pinpoint something that your current camera or your current device won't do that you need it to do, then you probably don't need to upgrade your camera. Use that money on something better. If it isn't a physical camera you've got, maybe buy yourself a lens and give yourself a different viewpoint, you know. Put that money into a course or a trip or something. The camera body is the last thing you realistically need to be spending money on to improve your photography. The question number 2 to ask yourself is, what will this add to my photography? And again, be honest with yourself. If the camera isn't going to add anything meaningful to your photography, see the answers to question 1. You know, put that money into a lens or a trip or a course. Do something that's actually going to force you into better photography, as opposed to just changing your camera body and probably ending up with the same pictures. And just as a side note to this, if you do decide that your camera is failing you in some way or another, don't immediately rush out to buy the most brand new thing, because you can get some absolute bargains, like I mentioned, the Nikon D800, for a steal of a price, relatively speaking. What they are capable of versus what they cost is pretty impressive. So always look to the used market rather than just going to wherever to buy the latest and greatest. So just to finish up, I just wanted to add that I have only ever twice owned brand new cameras. And they were never my main cameras, like the A6000. It was a backup camera, something to have in your bag, just to, you know, sling in your pocket, something simple. I don't see the point. When you can get fantastic cameras like the 5D Classic or even the Canon 60, which I've got just down there, or the Nikon D800 or the early Sony A7s and such as that, these cameras are all very, very capable and at this point in time represent an absolute bargain. You're getting full frame sensors, you're getting good dynamic range, you're getting great colors, you're getting enough resolution. And this, I think, is where everybody should be looking now if you're going to get into photography. So, let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.